March 23rd, 10:40 a.m. The compound had become a war zone. Flames licked at the edges of the eastern wall, now reduced to a gaping wound spilling smoke into the morning sky. The acrid stench of burning fuel and blood hung heavy in the air, choking every breath. Explosions reverberated like thunderclaps, their shockwaves rattling through my chest. Through the chaos, the sound of Price's voice cut through like a lifeline. "Hold the line," she bellowed, her rifle barking in sharp bursts. "They don't take another inch." Around me, the defenders were a blur of desperate motion. Soldiers braced against barricades, their faces streaked with soot and fear. Blood mixed with dirt, turning the ground into a slick, treacherous battleground. My hands tightened around the Halligan tool, the weight of it grounding me as I charged toward the nearest breach. An enemy soldier vaulted the crumbling barricade, his rifle raised. I swung the Halligan tool in a wide arc, the impact sending him sprawling to the ground. Another came from my left, his blade glinting in the haze. I ducked, the blade whistling past my ear, before driving the Halligan's spike into his chest. He crumpled, but there was no time to think. The next wave was already upon us. The eastern wall was gone. What remained was little more than twisted metal and scorched earth. Through the haze, the enemy surged forward, their armored vehicles looming like specters. The grinding of their engines was deafening, a harbinger of the destruction to come. Calloway stood at the center of the yard, his voice rising above the chaos as he rallied the defenders. "Grenades! Aim for the vehicles!" he shouted, his arm already cocking back to throw. The grenade arced through the air, detonating beneath the nearest truck. A fireball erupted, engulfing the vehicle and sending its occupants sprawling. The defenders cheered, their morale buoyed by the small victory, but it was short-lived. The next truck powered through the flames, its mounted turrets spewing a relentless hail of bullets. Harker appeared beside me, his face grim as he reloaded his weapon. "We're losing ground," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. "If we don't push them back now, it's over." "How?" I shouted, swinging the Halligan tool to knock down an advancing enemy. "We're barely holding them off as it is." Harker didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted to the command tent, where Greene was still frantically working at the laptop. "We need time," he said finally. "Whatever she's doing, it's our only shot." Price sprinted toward us, her rifle slung across her chest. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes blazing with determination. "We're consolidating at the command center," she said, her voice sharp. "Calloway's holding the line, but we're running out of options. We need to buy Greene more time." "What's the plan?" Harker asked, his tone clipped. "We make a stand here," Price replied. "We keep them off her long enough to finish whatever she's doing. If we lose this position, it's over." There was no hesitation in her words, no room for doubt. She turned to me, her expression softening just slightly. "You good?" I nodded, gripping the Halligan tool tightly. "I'm not going anywhere." The final push began. The enemy came in waves, their numbers seemingly endless. The defenders formed a tight perimeter around the command tent, their weapons firing in unison. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder, the ground trembling with each explosion. Maria was a whirlwind of motion, her rifle never wavering as she picked off targets. Tucker stood beside her, his shotgun roaring with each pull of the trigger. Harker moved like a shadow, his shots precise and calculated, each one finding its mark. I swung the Halligan tool with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. The enemy pressed closer, their shouts mingling with the cries of the wounded. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting, but we held. A sudden explosion rocked the command tent, the shockwave knocking me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing as I turned toward the source. The tent was still standing, but barely. Greene was inside, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the laptop screen. "We're out of time," Price shouted, her voice raw. "Whatever you're doing, finish it now." Greene didn't look up. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, her expression one of fierce concentration. "Just a few more seconds," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. I'm almost there. The enemy surged forward, their desperation matching our own. The defenders tightened the circle, their weapons blazing. Maria and Tucker fought side by side, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. Harker's rifle barked, each shot a lifeline. I turned toward the breach, where the enemy was pouring through like a flood. My arms ached, my vision blurred, but I kept swinging. Each blow was a statement, a refusal to yield. Done. Greene's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. She stood, holding the laptop like it was the key to our salvation. I've got it. Price turned to her, her eyes wide. What do we do? Greene's gaze was fierce. We run. The word hung in the air, a stark contrast to the desperate fight we'd been waging. Price hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Everyone, fall back. We're getting out of here. The defenders moved as one, covering each other as they retreated toward the northern exit. The enemy pressed forward, but their advance was disjointed, their coordination faltering. Whatever Greene had done, it was working. I grabbed Maria's arm as she passed me, pulling her toward the exit. Let's go. She nodded, her expression grim but determined. Together, we sprinted toward the northern gate, the sounds of battle fading behind us. The fight wasn't over, but we'd lived to see another day. And for now, that was enough. 11:10 a.m. The air outside the northern gate was just as chaotic as the compound we were fleeing. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the orange glow of flames still consuming the eastern wall. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed in the distance, a grim reminder of how close we had come to annihilation. The defenders, those who were left, moved as one, their faces pale and streaked with grime as they clung to their weapons. Behind us, the compound was a battlefield, the enemy's forces still pressing their assault. Move! Price's voice carried over the chaos. She was at the front of the group, her rifle slung across her chest as she waved us forward. We've got to put distance between us and that convoy before they regroup. I ran with Maria at my side, her rifle gripped tightly in her hands. Her breaths came in sharp gasps, but her eyes remained fixed ahead, scanning the horizon for threats. The northern terrain was rough and uneven, a mix of dirt paths and overgrown vegetation that slowed our progress. The group's pace was uneven, the wounded struggling to keep up despite the urgency. The weight of survival hung heavy over us, each step forward a victory against despair. Where are we going? I asked, my voice hoarse from shouting. Price glanced back at me, her jaw set. There's an old service tunnel about a mile north. If we can get to it, we'll have a chance to regroup and plan our next move. And if they catch us before then? Maria asked, her tone clipped, her knuckles white against her rifle stock. Price's expression hardened. They won't. Her words carried the weight of conviction, but beneath it, I could sense her unease. The sound of engines roared behind us, sending a ripple of panic through the group. I turned to see headlights cutting through the smoke, the enemy's vehicles closing the gap. Soldiers cursed and stumbled as they pushed forward, their steps faltering under the weight of exhaustion and fear. The uneven ground betrayed some, causing them to fall before being dragged upright by their comrades. They're coming, someone shouted, and the group broke into a desperate sprint. Tucker, Calloway, lay down suppressing fire. Price ordered, turning to face the oncoming vehicles. Tucker, still limping from his injuries, dropped to one knee and fired his shotgun, the boom of the blast momentarily drowning out the roar of the engines. Calloway joined him, his rifle barking as he aimed for the tires of the lead truck. Keep moving, Price shouted to the rest of us. We'll cover you. Maria grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. Come on, they'll catch up. I nodded, forcing my legs to move despite the burning in my muscles. The path ahead narrowed, flanked by dense trees that offered some cover, but also made it harder to see what lay ahead. The sound of gunfire and shouts faded slightly as we pushed further into the woods. My breaths came in shallow bursts, each step feeling like a fight against gravity. The service tunnel was exactly where Price had said it would be, its entrance hidden behind a cluster of overgrown bushes. The group stumbled into the clearing, their breaths ragged as they scanned the area for signs of pursuit. Price emerged last, her rifle still raised as she covered our rear. The intensity in her eyes was a stark contrast to the desperation in the faces around her. "Inside, now," she commanded, motioning us toward the tunnel. The entrance was narrow and dark, the faint smell of damp earth wafting out to meet us. Maria hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking back toward the sound of engines that still rumbled in the distance. "What if they find us?" she asked quietly. Price stepped past her, her expression unyielding. "Then we make sure they don't leave." The tunnel's interior was cold and claustrophobic, the walls lined with rusted pipes and cobwebs. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly against the damp floor. Greene carried the laptop like a sacred relic, her knuckles white as she clutched it to her chest. Tucker limped beside her, his face pale but determined, his shotgun held in a death grip. "How far does this go?" I asked, my voice low, barely above a whisper. "About half a mile," Price replied without looking back. "It leads to an old maintenance station. If we're lucky, it'll still be secure." "And if it's not?" Calloway asked, his tone heavy with exhaustion and doubt. Price glanced over her shoulder, her gaze hard. "Then we keep moving." The silence that followed her words was thick with unspoken fears. The tunnel's oppressive darkness seemed to amplify every sound. The scrape of boots on concrete, the labored breathing of the wounded, and the occasional creak of the rusted pipes overhead. 11:30 a.m. The group paused near a bend in the tunnel, their breaths heavy in the cold air. Price held up a hand, motioning for silence. We waited, straining to hear any sign of pursuit. The distant rumble of engines had faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness that only heightened our anxiety. The shadows seemed to move, playing tricks on our weary minds. "They'll find this place eventually," Maria whispered, her voice laced with dread. "It's only a matter of time." "Let them come," Tucker said, his voice grim. "We'll be ready." His grip tightened on his shotgun, and his gaze burned with defiance. Price didn't respond. Her focus was on Greene, who was hunched over the laptop, her fingers tapping rapidly against the keys. The faint glow of the screen cast her face in sharp relief, her determination etched into every line. "You've got a plan, right?" I asked Greene, my voice tight, trying to pierce the suffocating silence. She looked up briefly, her expression unreadable. "I'm working on it. Whatever Orpheus has planned, it's all here. We just need time to figure out how to use it." Time was the one thing we didn't have. The shadows in the tunnel seemed to close in around us, and every creak and drip of water felt like the approach of something worse. We had survived the compound, but it was clear. This fight wasn't over. The tension was a living thing, pressing down on us as we moved deeper into the tunnel. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of our escape was dragging us back. Whatever lay ahead, we had no choice but to face it together. The air in the maintenance station was damp and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of rust and stagnant water. Our group had settled into the confines of the small space, a labyrinth of pipes and machinery that hummed faintly with the life of old systems barely holding together. The station offered a brief respite, but every creak and echo felt like a harbinger of the inevitable. Greene was hunched over her laptop in the corner, the screen casting a pale glow on her exhausted face. Her fingers moved frantically across the keys, the rhythm punctuated by muttered curses. Price stood nearby, her rifle slung but her posture alert, scanning the room as if expecting the walls themselves to betray us. "How long do we have?" Maria asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her unease as she leaned against the rusted frame of an old control panel. Price didn't look up. "Depends on how fast they figure out where we went. With the vehicles they've got, not long." Tucker, his leg bandaged but blood seeping through the dressing, let out a low growl. "Let them come. They'll find more fight here than they bargained for." "Fighting isn't the goal," Price snapped, her tone sharp. "Staying alive is. If we waste energy here, we'll have nothing left for the next leg." "And where exactly is the next leg?" Calloway asked, his voice laced with frustration. He gestured toward the tunnel we'd come through. "We're boxed in, Price. You know that. Price's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Greene's voice cut through the tension. Got it, she said, her tone triumphant. She turned the laptop to face Price, the screen displaying a series of maps and encrypted files. This is what Orpheus didn't want us to find. Coordinates, movement plans, and something else, testing sites. The weight of Greene's revelation settled over us like a storm cloud. Price leaned over the screen, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the data. They've been moving infected here? She asked, pointing to one of the locations. Not just infected, Greene replied. They're testing something. Maybe alphas, maybe worse. Whatever it is, it's big. And it's happening at this site. She tapped a set of coordinates that glowed ominously on the screen. How far? Maria asked, stepping closer. 2 days on foot. Maybe one if we can find transportation, Greene answered, her voice grave. But we can't leave without knowing what's out there. If this is their endgame, we have to see it through. Tucker groaned, leaning back against the wall. We're barely standing as it is. You want to march into their backyard? It's not about what we want, Price said, her tone firm. It's about what we have to do. If Orpheus is building something worse than the alphas, we can't ignore it. The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Each of us knew she was right, but the path ahead felt impossibly steep. A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, a low growl that set every nerve on edge. The group froze, exchanging tense glances as the sound grew louder. It wasn't the hum of engines, but something heavier, more deliberate. They're here, Maria whispered, gripping her rifle tightly. Her knuckles turned white as her grip tightened. Price motioned for silence, raising her rifle as she moved toward the tunnel entrance. Positions. Now. The group scrambled into action, taking cover behind machinery and support beams. Tucker, despite his injuries, positioned himself near the tunnel's opening, his shotgun resting across his lap. Maria knelt beside him, her eyes locked on the darkness beyond, her breaths steady but shallow. What's the play? I asked, crouching beside Price. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. We hold them here as long as we can. Greene's got what we need, but we can't move until we know we've thinned their numbers. The rumble grew louder, accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps and voices. Whoever was coming, they were close. Too close. The first figure emerged from the tunnel, their silhouette outlined by the faint glow of a flashlight. They were armored, their weapon raised as they scanned the room. Behind them, more figures followed, their movements coordinated and deliberate. Their confidence was palpable, a force of their own that filled the air with tension. Price held up a hand, signaling us to hold fire. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity as the enemy advanced. Then, without warning, Maria fired. Her shot was precise, striking the lead soldier square in the chest. The room erupted into chaos as the others returned fire, bullets ricocheting off machinery and walls. Hold the line, Price shouted, her rifle spitting fire as she took down another soldier. Her voice carried the weight of command, cutting through the cacophony. I swung the Halligan tool at the first enemy who got too close, the impact sending them sprawling. Around me, the group fought with desperate ferocity, their movements fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. Tucker's shotgun roared, its deafening blasts cutting through the chaos. Each pull of the trigger sent another enemy crashing to the ground. Maria's rifle provided steady cover fire, her shots precise and unyielding. 11:55 a.m. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. The enemy's precision was matched only by their numbers, and for everyone we took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Tucker's face was a mask of pain and grit, his wounded leg trembling as he held his ground. Calloway fired in controlled bursts, his eyes darting between targets as sweat dripped down his brow. Greene crouched low behind a support beam, her laptop clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes darted between the battle and the data on the screen, searching for something, anything, that could turn the tide. They're overwhelming us, Calloway shouted, his voice strained as he fired another burst. We can't hold much longer. Price's voice was unyielding. We hold until we can't, and then we move. Maria's voice cut through the chaos. "We need an opening now." The maintenance station echoed with the deafening sounds of combat. Sparks flew from ricocheting bullets, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. The group was a whirlwind of desperate resistance, every movement a fight against the inevitable. The station had become a crucible, a place where survival was no longer just a goal. It was a test of will. Each of us knew that this battle was more than just a skirmish. It was the prelude to a larger, more dangerous game. And the stakes had never been higher.